cars. It's always a race to see who can claim the drop first, and it's always a fight.
Another year, another Far Cry is upon us. Now, it's as beautiful as ever, but warning, spoiler alert here. After the holocaust of the possible fifth ending, we commence our next kleptomaniac adventure in the blooming stage after the fallout. Your expectations should be clear on what you get here. 2D psychotic bad guy or girl. Check. An open, lush and gorgeously rendered forest to wreak havoc in. Check. Wooden acting and drab characters to send you on fetch tasks with some modern day pop culture references are thrown in there. Check.
I'll see you at Prosperity soon, right? Right. Oh, okay. Bye.
A cascade of systemic comedy ragdoll moments. Check. Stack of weapons, vehicles and loot to grab, upgrade and kit out like an episode of the A-Team. Checkity check. Little has changed on that score since 3 really, as the Far Cry team and the Dunia engine have added, tweaked and enhanced it. The formula still has that very same taste. And that's fine. If you want more of the same with the added option of playing to dodge the grind, this is business as usual. Here with the top and tail of the console world, I'm checking out the Xbox versions in the S and the X. Still powered by the Dunia engine that has evolved over the years from its loose CryEngine roots way back from the second game. It really morphed into the sandbox games we know of now from the third entry. A lush jungle settings, wildlife, open camps and time of day all stood out back then. And the improvements of the engine have not been that apparent since the start of this generation. Far Cry 4 is the core template we have seen since, and that had those last gen roots still tied in with its cross-gen release on Xbox 360 and PS3. The 7th entry itself since 3rd, and the 4th entry this generation alone. It still renders some of the best and most dense forest and fauna this side of Dawn's last horizon. Trees sway beautifully in the wind, branches billow, light cascades through with crepuscular rays or volumetric fog hanging above. A high reliance on shadow maps and dynamic lighting all embellish the landscape with a mix of serene beauty and chaotic destruction. The team's largest single increase in virtual texturing was a core boost in 4 that is used here alongside terrain displacement from height maps within the vertex shaders. Now this adds extra depth to ground detail, and alongside the decals and rock meshes creates a vivid virtual playground that handles large texture assets and materials to fill your gaze. Now some of the weakness is that so much is spent on exterior fidelity that interiors can suffer. Almost as much as this poor book collection. I mean, how many copies of meat do you actually need? Yeah, strange. The engine and art team's use of atmospheric scattering achieved through a combination of billboard fog, depth shading, volumetrics and colour grading give a rich, warm and signature look to the title, and especially here in New Dawn. One that is always impressive, except at night when it can look much flatter, and this has been evident right back from 4. The diffused material element is also a factor, with it being an overriding ingredient to much of the world fabric and construction, and this is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it reduces specular aliasing and shimmer, even from the low resolution of the S model. On the other, it can give a heavy gamey look to objects and characters across the series. These elements are enriched during the real-time cinematics with better subsurface scattering on skin, a more controlled use of point and shadow casting light sources, depth of field, and improved specularity, bolstering the image quality quite significantly. It also stands out with the improved motion captured movements and facial capture, turning good but quite dead inside characters into emotive and living beings. The clear split of these two requirements is not well hidden though, with them always loading in and out from a fade, and they are the best way to show off the excellent animation rigging and materials and post effects the team and the engine delivered here. There's also that combination of real-time and pre-rendered cutscenes, which the quality can again be obvious, especially on a 4K screen on the X here. Even if the slow flicker of sun, wavering trees and scree space reflective water all impress you from the start, it still looks and feels just like a Far Cry game. One big reason is the material shading, as I just mentioned, leaving a dithered and soft look. The HR anti-aliasing adds to this, softening high frequency elements and merging frame data without any motion blur to help it out. It can leave some obvious ghosting and blur at times, which can be quite muddy on the base machine here, causing loss of clarity at a mid to long distance even on a 1080p screen. Some of this is due to the 1440 by 1080p resolution, which appears to be at a fixed level, but I do suspect, as I covered on the games prior, that a reconstruction element may be at play here, as the screen can appear very soft at times, belying the raw pixel count. It is a prettier game than previous entries with such a lush setting, but it does not offer as much breadth within it as we had in Far Cry 5. These are the new DLC delivery methods, with a smaller team managing content, story, additions, etc. from the core elements that delivered the last title. Hence the reduced price, and I'm sure that will drop much more in the next few weeks. Comparing it to Far Cry 4 on the very same console, the image is far more stable. The character models are much better animated, but clarity is lower due to the AA and that softer image. It's the same resolution, but in actual fact it's a combination of whether you prefer the sharper but certainly more aliased and noisy image on Far Cry 4 to this much more stable but softer image on Far Cry New Dawn. The animation rigging and the character models themselves have significantly improved. You can see some of the elements they've improved across the title. The animation and the movement in the forest and the trees is much better, it's more dynamic. They've enhanced the effects in the title from the volumetric fog and the crepuscular rays. I actually covered this way back when Far Cry 4 launched, with it being taken out or not present on the Xbox One and then taken out of the PS4 and then put back again. It looks here on the latest copy that it's been taken back out again, so I don't know what's going on with the versions on Far Cry 4. But again, other elements have been added to the mix. Things like screen space reflections, which weren't present on Far Cry 4, are now fully implemented here, with the old version using a combination of reflections from cube maps and then a sprite proxy attached to the object itself, which allowed a form of reflections for dynamic objects, albeit pretty weak. Whereas the latest game has screen space reflections everywhere. You can see dynamic objects and static objects all being reflected, but again they fade out whilst you move down and out of the camera frustum, the standard screen space limitations. The other benefit is the water itself is much better. It's quite flat, just a flat layer on the old game with very little or very limited amounts of interaction, just a simple shader put over the top. Whereas here in Far Cry New Dawn you get a pixel shader running there to give that water surface a ripple and water effect. Again, it chases behind boats as well when you're riding along the water. And this again is an improvement to the game, and the engine itself, which may go unnoticed by many, but the game has been iterated on with individual parts, making everything look more realistic, more dynamic, and again more pleasing on the eyeballs. And that fundamentally is the art of GPU and graphics programming. That's the whole point. And that's of course in line with the artists and the animators and the visual effects artists and the lighting artists. Well, you get my point. Moving on from the look of the engine itself and the improvements, visually both Xbox One and Xbox One X are pretty much the same. Draw distance, quality, effects, shadow mapping, everything looks pretty much identical, including the drawing, as you can see an example of here. There's not a huge difference between the two versions, aside the obvious boost in resolution, with the Xbox One X running a clear dynamic solution here, which we couldn't pick up on the Xbox One S, but it's certainly running on the X here, coming out at a full 3840 by 2160, and then again scaling down by around 80%, right down to 3456 by 1944. It may go lower, it certainly doesn't go any higher, but whatever it is, it oscillates between the max 4K and whatever that level is. But I would imagine 80%, 75% would be a standard scaling resolution used here to keep the performance and the visual quality high at the GPU load that's available on the X. And obviously the net result of that is a much cleaner, sharper and more pristine image over the S model. You can see it here, and it really starts to show up the lower quality image in this title due to the TAA, the soft look of the materials and that lower quality resolution across the horizontal axis. It really affects the image quality overall, and it's a bigger gap than performance, and that means that we see a dip in both versions, but much more often and more regular on the S. In fact, the X, I couldn't really find that many dips or tears that really caused any concern. It does tear very occasionally, and it can skip sometimes into the 16 milliseconds, but again, these are quite rare. Overall, it's a very consistent and locked 30 FPS, no frame pacing issues. It's a very boring story, really. In the S version, you might be offended by some of the tearing and dips, but it really isn't a bad performing title overall. In terms of the statistics, you can check them out in the description below, but I think we're looking at somewhere around 6% of the image is torn on the Xbox One S, which obviously is not great, but it really isn't that bad either. Anthem, which I recently covered, was obviously far worse. It's a pretty solid performing title. It's what we expect of the Far Cry titles at this point, and it is much better than what we saw way back with Far Cry 4 on both the PS4 and the Xbox One. So they've improved the clarity, the image, the textures, and all the details that I've just covered in this video, and it still performs better than that older version, albeit with a little tearing here and there. These generation consoles have done us proud at this point, but there are signs at this point that the X is really starting to show its age. So I'm sure Microsoft will be quick to replace it a little sooner than Sony will on their PlayStation brand. That's it for my Far Cry coverage, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, subscribe and share where appropriate, or ring that bell to be notified of new videos as I put them up. And I'll see you on the next one.
Oh my God. Jesus, I thought you were dead. I should have known you'd come through. You came back for me.